Welcome back to the Combat Learning Podcast, where we talk about science for incredible martial arts training. I'm your host, Josh Peacock. Today, I'm joined by Sony Sahota, owner of Praxis Gym and a teacher of judo, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu. In this episode, we discuss how Sony approaches training through the lens of embodied cognition, specifically enactivism. Sony recounts how it changed his entire approach to training. And then we move on into a deep philosophical discussion about embodied cognition. One of my favorite parts of the discussion was when we discussed the role of agency and will within the embodied understanding. Sony is interesting because he used to make an income from BJJ Fanatics instructionals. After his philosophy of coaching changed, he put his principles first and no longer makes instructionals, instead focusing on his own mat and teaching in-person seminars from an embodied cognition angle. Before I put you into the episode, a quick word. I'm writing resources on Substack. I'm reviewing important scientific papers and applying them to martial arts. I'm also taking Rob Gray's How We Learn to Move and applying it to martial arts chapter by chapter. This is literally my best work and certainly the best writing I've ever done on the ecological approach. But you need a premium subscription to access most of these articles. Right now, it's only $9 a month, but it's not going to stay that way. In a week or two, I'm doubling the price, so don't wait to sign up. If you're excited to jump in, hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher and enjoy the show. All right, man. Welcome to the Combat Learning Podcast. Could you go ahead and introduce yourself to my listeners?
Hey, I'm Sony Sahota. I'm a black belt in judo and purple belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. But Brazilian jiu-jitsu and jiu-jitsu, it's my primary grappling sport. I've been doing that for over 15 years. Didn't get a chance to get ranked up for a while, but that doesn't matter. I like jiu-jitsu. I also do wrestling and sambo as well. I think I'm better known in a niche area within the judo and jiu-jitsu community as the no-gi judo guy. I have 2 instructionals on BJJ Fanatics and Judo Fanatics, which are best sellers, and that surprised and shocks me at the same time.
Yeah.
But knowing what I know now about ecological dynamics, I'm not making instructionals anymore. So that side gig is done.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So let's talk about your journey into ecological dynamics that will explain to newer listeners why it is that you actually decided to stop making BJJ Fanatics instructionals for the time being.
Yeah, I think it started around 2 years ago. I was following this guy on Instagram, Andy from School of Grappling, and he put out a series of thought-provoking infographics on skill acquisition and how we should approach jiu-jitsu. And it was very philosophical, and I was intrigued. So I reached out to Andy and I asked him, like, hey, I want to know a little bit more about what you're talking about. And he sent me a list of books to read, and they're all basically philosophical books. Okay. It was Martin Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, Husserl. So he said, start from there, start getting these ideas down first, and then you can get into complex systems theory or dynamical systems theory. And already I was overwhelmed.
Right.
So I started with Heidegger, being in time, and trying to get through that book. Incidentally, 20 years ago when I was in college, I actually wrote a paper on Heidegger, discrediting his philosophy, and also he's an unapologetic Nazi. So I felt like I had to take him down. So I had a pretty good grade on that paper, but now 20 years later, I'm finding myself agreeing with his ideas. So it's a kind of a really mixed bag of not his political ideas, his philosophical ideas. Yeah. So I have to kind of reconcile that somehow, and it's not happening. But So his philosophical ideas are very applicable on what I'm trying to do in grappling right now. So revisiting Heidegger's ideas, and then I started getting into Merleau-Ponty, where the body and the human experience is used, and how we situate ourselves in the environment. So all that was happening. And then around last year, I discovered Greg Souders on Reddit. And there was this huge, I don't know, I'm new to Reddit. I don't know what they call it, threads or something. I don't know. But
Yeah.
he talked about not using techniques and not drilling. And I was quite enthralled by that. The comments were pretty bad. And I reached out to Greg and I said, hey, Greg, saw your stuff on Reddit and I'm a little bit curious. Where do you think I should start? And then he obviously sent me books by Rob Gray, or suggestions to read Rob Gray's stuff. And for those who are listening, if you want to understand Greg Souders, he's literally talking about everything Rob Gray talks about in his book. So read Rob Gray's books, you'll understand Greg Souders. It's actually that simple. So yeah, and then I was hooked. I was hooked on ecological dynamics. I started doing that 10 months ago, around January of this year. And yeah, it was hard. It was difficult. And then over the months, you get a little bit better at it. And then new information came out through the podcasts. So I'm always listening to podcasts featuring Greg and other people. And even today, it's just an ongoing journey of learning more about ecological dynamics, and along with my own personal study and reading research papers and all of that.
Absolutely. So you didn't, for me, starting way back is like reading Keith Davids and JJ Gibson and some of those guys way back in the day, ecological psychology, and maybe Carl Newell or something. But you started all the way back at Heidegger.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had to get some extra books, like companion books, just to understand Heidegger.
Oh, yeah.
And
German philosophers,
and,
yes.
Yeah. And even Merleau-Ponty's even worse, I think.
Probably.
But
I've never read him, but I've read Heidegger before.
Yeah. But I mean, the journey is so worthwhile. Like, I mean, they are fascinating ideas, and they do kind of relate to what we're doing in these environments that we're engaged in. And it just gives me a different dimension of looking at grappling from a philosophical point of view. And then later on with ecodynamics, we're looking at it very scientifically. Again, the science is actually quite theoretical. You know, you don't have any empirical evidence, but the research suggests that it is effective. And, you know, and this is what motivates me to continue with ecodynamics.
Sure. I might push back on the empirical aspect. We at least have some direct measurements between the two, or the different methodologies, I should say. There's a few in there. There's differential learning, there's CLA, and then there's like repetition. So we have some empirical evidence in terms of there being different outcome, but it's very much new. It's not, the level of evidence is still low.
Yeah, it's still developing.
Yeah, it's still developing. So it's pretty new. I mean, there's been some stuff that's been around, but especially not sport specific. Like we're still running. I say we as if we're one whole team. The ecological researchers got that whole gamut of guys are and gals are, they're still running stuff like, you know, something like tau or tau dot, you know, like trying to prove some of the smaller, more modest claims about how we perceive it. But they are doing more stuff that's not quite as I don't know what to call it, clinical, like in the like very, very controlled. Like we're actually getting teams, and we're having teams being taught differently over a course of time, and then measuring what the outcomes and the nature of the outcome. It's fairly new to that, but absolutely, dude, this is awesome. So how is your how's your jiu-jitsu program changed over the last, I guess it's been a year, right? Last 9
Yeah,
months,
it's
you
been a
said?
year
Yeah.
now.
Okay.
Um, how has it changed? It's a strange question because things like the students or the athletes, they almost don't even notice the change. They just simply do jujitsu now. The format of the class has changed. I mean, I don't spend 20 minutes explaining a technique anymore. We just get right into it, and they're enjoying it. We've been doing it for so long. I think that's just kind of like the norm right now. Like I'm like one of those coaches who's like, oh, I get to do whatever I want in Sonny's class, and people get very motivated to come to that class because they get to work on whatever they like. My journey as a coach has definitely changed. Like it's one of the strangest things. I spend at least 2 hours a day planning a class, designing games, and when I go to class, I don't say anything. I just tell them to do what your attention and what your intention is, and just go do it and self-organize. But it takes a lot of planning, and I half joke. I joke like, oh, techniques don't exist, positions don't exist, jujitsu doesn't exist. It sounds funny, but I'm kind of half not joking, right? Like it's a very strange experience. I guess what I'm saying right now, I think quite recently, maybe 3 weeks ago, I've just sort of had some breakthroughs in my coaching. So 3 weeks ago, we were doing what we would know as a belly down arm lock for the jiu-jitsu community. I designed a constraint game around that. People start in the prone position, they have the arm extended, and you just go live from there. So a lot of the athletes were finishing the arm lock belly down on the side, the regular way from the top, from the mount, from the guard. Had no problem separating the arms. So everything was going great. But eventually students will come to me after class and they'll be like, hey, coach, how do you actually do the arm lock? And I'm just a little bit taken aback because, well, did you not finish the arm lock? Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm getting taps. Okay, well, are you having trouble? Are you having trouble separating the arms? No, it's not bad. I can do it. Okay, so then what's the issue? And they're like, well, is there a better way to do an arm lock? Well, I'll just keep, and this back and forth keeps going on. It's like, well, you've been finishing it in a variety of ways. Does it really matter? So at first I was taken aback, and then now I'm starting to reflect on it, and I'm like, okay, what these athletes are experiencing is that they are self-organizing in a way that cannot be represented. So they're experiencing a non-representational form of cognition. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to encapsulate and to repeat and maybe even transfer that information. But using the ecological dynamics approach, it may not be possible because that's just not how it works. But somehow they have this idea that they want to replicate what they've done in practice so they don't have to like work for it again or whatnot. So this is the challenge, like what I'm kind of facing right now using the this method. So like if people were interested in ecodynamics, particularly the athletes, they would probably have to understand that there's more than one form of cognition. Okay. And if they understand that, the eco approach would make a lot more sense. Right. So this question actually got me on a journey to actually research like what these athletes are experiencing. So it's not good enough for you to complete your tasks. Most of these athletes want to find some type of meaning, or they want to appreciate a lived experience of what they're trying to do. And I haven't found a satisfactory answer within ecological psychology or ecological dynamics. So I looked at other forms of embodied cognition.
Yeah, let's talk about embodied cognition? Because this is something I haven't really talked much about on the podcast. It's honestly something I'm weaker in terms of reading. I haven't read much about it except what you can catch offhandedly through ecological dynamics literature, direct EcoD literature. So I'm interested to understand where you're at right now in understanding embodied cognition and how that is helping you explain your athlete's experience and maybe give them something afterwards that feels sufficient to them in terms of understanding what they're doing.
Right. Well, like I said, I'll try the best I can on this one because I'm still researching a little bit more about embodied cognition. So, what embodied cognition, to what I've read and what I understand, is basically an umbrella of different forms of non-representational cognition. So, this is cognition that does not rely on language, symbols, or metaphors, none of that. So this cognition relies on different forms, such as, in order for me to perceive anything, it's not strictly mental. It's not your mind as a computer that's interpreting information. Actually, your physical body is embedded into the environment. A lot of what are processing, or if you want to call it like interpreting information, is physical. Like our bodies tend to self-organize in ways that we just simply cannot understand under a computational form. Okay, so either we're embodied within our environment. A lot of the things that we are interacting with our environment is embedded. And a lot of our minds, which is what a lot of neuroscience talks about, is that our minds can be extended into the environment. So an example of that would be like, well, instead of just remembering detailed information in our minds, we tend to use like notebooks, or we use our iPhones to like write notes. And the iPhone or notebooks are just an extension of our minds. It's a physical object that's in the environment that we can refer to on a need to know basis, right? You can even apply this in jujitsu. Like your opponent's gi is an extension. It's actually embedded in the environment. It's part of your central nervous system. So you don't really need to think about where your grips are or how you're gripping or where your feet are placed. Your body already knows that through its self-organization capabilities. Yeah. So it is a big umbrella of different forms of non-representational cognition. Okay. And then there's like many schools of thought within this umbrella of embodied cognition. Ecological psychology is the first and probably the oldest school of thought under the embodied cognition umbrella. But there's other schools as well. There's enactivism, and then there's something recently developed by neuroscientist Carl Friston called the free energy principle. And we'll get into this a little bit later. But so a lot of people right now in the skill acquisition and the movement community, they're very familiar with ecological dynamics. All right. But there's other schools as well. And what I'm looking into right now, what my athletes are experiencing, where they're asking questions on things that they're actually accomplishing, is that they want a meaningful explanation of what's going on. And I think some of these issues can be sort of like, you can find not answers, but you can find some solutions in other schools of thoughts like enactivism. So what is enactivism? Basically, it is a similar school of thought as ecological psychology. Both enactivism and ecological psychology, they agree that there's an agent or organism and environment mutuality. They're structurally coupled together. They both also believe that cognition is non-representational. Now, where they depart is where they depart and where they disagree on is where the focus is. Ecological psychology and ecological dynamics, it seems like the enactivists charge them as saying, you guys focus way too much on the environment. You think all the information is in the environment, and therefore the organism just simply perceives affordances and acts on them. It's just way too, like, I mean, the very name ecological suggests it's all in the environment. All right. Now, the ecological psychology people, they charge the enactivists as, hey, you guys focus way too much on the organism. You know, you don't pay enough attention in the environment. You guys think that the organism is creating a lot of meaningful and subjective reflecting on what they're doing. And basically, you're just decoupling yourself from the environment. So there's these very different ways of looking at non-representational cognition, right?
Sure.
So what's happening right now with my athletes is that, okay, yeah, they're accomplishing their tasks, they're successful, but they want to have a meaningful connection to what they're doing. And I think enactivism does give a little bit of insight on why that's happening. And this is something that I'm kind of looking over and trying to figure out myself. And, but yeah, it just gets on to, it just goes on and on from there.
Yeah. It's, one of the things that struck me is you talked about one of the ways that we actually extend our minds into the world is by note taking. And it's funny, when we take notes, we use we use external representations. So when we talk about representative cognition, what we mean is that there is a model or representation stored somewhere in your brain, that your mind is somehow governed and shaped by a sort of well, I guess the model is probably the best word to use, but representation is usually the most common term for it, I think. And so those things, they take what you perceive, or rather they dictate what you perceive. So you take what you see, what you hear, what you experience in the environment is, I guess. So hold on a second. I was sloppy there. Experience is cheating. The stimulus data.
Maybe perceiving would be another word.
Well, in IP, perception is in part governed by, it's like this constructivist idea that that the model actually controls some aspect of your perception. And that if you didn't have the model, the stimulus data of the things that hit your eye, that enter your ear, that brush against your skin, is insufficient. It has to be remediated, organized, and then made actionable internally. So there's a way in which your brain constructs the world around you.
Yes.
Almost irrespective of the shape of the world. Whereas with some form of embodied cognition, the world, you are able to perceive the world accurate enough that the information is embedded in what you perceive, and that the representations are not what's governing what you see. So you're seeing as close to what you can to whatever you as an organism being embedded in this ecology, so to speak, you are perceiving that to the best of your equipment. And anything that you would think. So the people they always have. This is a funny thing that I've learned by really beginning in cognitivist type of works. Things that a lot of people have read, like Thinking Fast and Slow, and influence and things like that. A lot of the research they've done has a lot of interesting findings that are germane to what we talk about, what we think about. But the way cognitivists explain it is so flagrantly dishonest. It's like almost when you start to learn how to see it, it's kind of it's like an obvious marketing campaign. So they say things like they'll talk about something like illusions and magic shows and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's their ability to manipulate your attention is described in terms of manipulating your whole perception. And so these sorts of analogies that they'll use to prove that in fact your perception of the world is inadequate and requires all these ongoing schemas and models to be updated and stuff like that. When in reality, at least from an ecological dynamics perspective, you trusted you're looking to this illusionist or something, whatever. You're looking to them for cues. They are directing your attention, and by directing your attention, they are able to keep your attention off of other things because you can't perceive everything at once. And that's basically what's happening on a basic level is they just manipulate your attention and you miss things because your intention is calibrated by the magician. And so you don't expect to have to recalibrate or search for different information again. And they're able to successfully fool you or look it looks like magic or something. Obviously that comes in different forms. What's that? You cut out there. You still there?
Yeah, I'm right here. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay. I don't know. Was that you? I don't know.
No, I really don't know. You just cut out. So maybe it could be me. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I missed a little bit of part of that, but yeah. So the illusion trick and all that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like these things that are supposed to be evidence that your models are bad or they need to be calibrated or that your brain constructs reality around you are not really that. They're basic. They're very obvious, like to me, obviously instances of manipulating attention. And that, as far as how we think as ecological dynamicists, attention is one of the most important things in terms of perception.
Right. But, it's the thing where you actually apply this. Like in my jiu-jitsu class, like, let's just say we're doing we're passing the half guard, what we call a half guard, or if you think it exists or not. What is their attention and what is their intention, right? When I go to a lot of academies where I'm at, or the city I'm at, who claim to do ecological dynamics, they don't know what the attention or intention is. They just say, "Oh, just pass the half guard and go to side control." Okay, but there's a little bit more to it than just that, right? So, as someone who's designing a game, you have to be very aware of what you're doing. What happens after you pass, or what happens when you go complete one of your tasks? What's the end game from there? Are you getting closer to your end game? So these are the kind of things what I do when I try to design. I don't like calling them games, but I'll use the word games just to so people know what I'm talking about.
Sure.
So a lot of what you see online and on Instagram is that people, you see these simple games. Okay, there's a hand fighting game, there's a guard passing game, there's a guard retention game, there's a pinning game, but you don't see a lot of submission games. And I find that those are the most difficult to design. So Greg talks about invariants. So there are invariant properties in phase space that we have to be aware of. And once you understand those invariant properties, they can take a manifold of variations, but the function stays the same, right?
Right.
I've taken Greg's idea and I've kind of like expanded on it on my own for my own reference. So when I design a submission game, I need to understand three things, right? First is the global invariant. Okay. So let's just say, for example, we're doing an arm lock, jujigatame, whatever you want to call it. Okay. I'm isolating the arm. The arm sticks to my chest. I'm holding that. However you want to hold it can take different forms, but the function stays the same. No matter what I do, that arm is stuck to my chest. All right. That's the global invariant. All right. Now I look what the local invariant is. The local invariant is what my legs are doing. I'm trying to connect to your center mass. I want to occupy one end of the lever, which is the global invariant, occupying your wrists. I want to occupy the other end of the lever with the local invariant, okay, which is the head and shoulders, or it could be the shoulder, whatever that is, okay? I need the student to figure out how are they going to lock in that local invariant. And it could take a manifold of, there's a manifold of ways that they can do that. However, they can occupy the two ends of the lever. That's basically what I'm trying to get them to self-organize towards. And you'll be surprised like how people can figure out and come up with some very creative ways to do that arm lock. And they don't necessarily know what they're doing, but it's working. And I think they're trying to find a way to like understand like, okay, what just happened? Like they're reflecting on that experience. Like what happened? Can I repeat this again? And this is going to be like a challenge when you're first learning like a grappling art like jiu-jitsu. It's like, people have this need to understand what they're doing, right? But when I approach grappling, I'm at a state where I'm not attached to these things. I'm just keeping myself open. I'm keeping it spontaneous. I'm keeping it nonlinear. And I'm just acting on affordances at this point. And which affordances I act on, I'll take whatever's given to me. But some people feel that they need to have a specific affordance that they want to act on, right? So these are the things I'm kind of coming up with. Some people have like a favorite technique of theirs that they want to do, but it's not working within a dynamic system. So they're not satisfied, even though they're successful in completing their tasks. They're not satisfied that they didn't get their favorite technique that they learned from John Danaher or Gordon Ryan, right? And then they're trying to force that into the system, and it just simply doesn't work, right? I'm not saying that what John Danaher and Gordon Ryan, I'm not saying their stuff doesn't work. It works in a particular context, but they're just not recognizing. They're not recognizing the affordances. They're not experiencing the context in which those work in, right? So, so it's this is the kind of stuff that Greg's talking about, right? And I'm like, the more I immerse myself in this coaching method, the more I'm understanding Greg, a lot more, right? So,
right, yeah.
If
you've never tried any of this, if you've never read about it, if you've never experienced any of it, it seems like it's something it's ridiculous, it's subscientific, it's pseudo, whatever. And you would think to yourself, there's no way that can be true. But we are encumbered, through our time, through the school system, TV, basically all coaches we ever come into contact with, they all think in broadly the same way about how you acquire skill.
We've been doing this our whole lives.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We thought this way forever. So it's very difficult to think in a different way.
Right.
And
who would have thought that your physical body is another tool for cognition? We don't even think we do it all the time, but we just now we're like, oh, you mean to say that it's essential for me to understand the world through my physical body? Who would have thought that?
Yeah, not everything is going on inside of your head.
Exactly. But yet you're doing it every day, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you think about it like the endocrine system and things like that. these are all things that have an incredible influence on your state of mind at any given time. And they are not in your brain. They're connected to your brain, but they're not in your brain. So yeah, everything's distributed. Your perceptual system, just because your ears and your eyes and your sense of smell are in your head, you also have your sense of touch. You have your sense of proprioception, where you are in space, the angulature that you're at in space. And that sort of changes as you move, because there's a sense of how you move and the trajectory in which you are moving. So there's many senses that are not just senses about what's in your head. You know, you have haptic input and things like that. So, you know, we're not saying that, some people I think misunderstand us to think that, you know, that mathematics is like not a thing and you can't do complex cognitive stuff and you can't see images in your head. I mean, some people can't, but I think most people can imagine things. They can manipulate objects in their head. They can create representations or things that feel like representation. But the representation, that's not what we're talking about when we say representation. When we say representation, we mean like a semi-permanent fixture in your brain that organizes and structures and constructs your perception. We're saying that there is no central controller of that. It's distributed, and your equipment, your body is such that you are able to perceive structure in the environment, and that structure is meaningful. It's information, and you have an innate sense. You have an immediate access to how you feel, which allows you, in perceiving the environment in a certain way, to create a relationship with the environment. And that's where affordances come from. Can I step on this sidewalk? Well, the structure of the surface will clue you on whether or not you can. In the more experience you have walking on sidewalks, the more you will understand that slightly differing visual structures to the sidewalk dictate how you should walk on it, or if you should walk on it. For example, ice.
Well, this is what Jay Gibson was talking about, right?
Right.
Like visual perception is also related to your body, right? Your body's also connected to your visual field, right? So, and this is where he's saying that it's ecological in the sense that all the organism's perceptual capabilities are ecological. So it's not that we're just ecologically it's not just a mutuality of the agent and the environment. It's ecological in the sense that the agent's own perceptual capabilities, all those systems are ecological as well.
Yeah.
So, but then this is where this whole meaning and lived experienced thing comes in. Are we just agents acting in an environment, and just like that's all there is to life? That we're just there's a particular environment, there's constraints in myself, and there's constraints in the environment, and we act on affordances. That's one way you can look at it, and we're capable of doing that. But as human beings, we need to reflect on what we're doing, right? So one of the main things, and I don't say this explicitly in class, but one of the main features I use from ecological dynamics and enactivism is this idea of self-organization. That is one of the primary principles I use in my classes. I don't say it, I want them to experience it. All right. So another way to put it, self-organization is simply just acting, finding your own way of acting on affordances. All right. But I also use another term for myself, and that's autopoiesis. Okay. Autopoiesis is also self-organization, but self-organizations in the sense that is meaningful and that you are not just acting in the environment, you are enacting on it. So you have to take your lived experience and you have to tie it to the affordance. Now, a lot of eco-psych guys and a lot of eco-dynamics people may disagree with me, but this is where I'm verging on right now. It's kind of like I'm mixing terminologies. Like I'm using the word affordances, which does not exist in enactivism. And enactivism does not even use the word autopoiesis. They'll just say, oh, why are you trying to bring meaningful, why are you trying to bring this meaning and all this stuff that borders on phenomenology in, like, you're just decoupling the whole process. But this is what the athletes are experiencing, right? So I use the word autopoiesis as a term of like self-organization. It could be meaning that you can simply act on the environment or you can enact. And whatever meaningful enaction you have with the affordance is completely up to the agent, right? And there's no way I can tell people what to do. I can't prescribe things onto my athletes. They have to figure it out on themselves. And that's what's the joy of discovery. That's the joy of what being involved in a dynamic system, such as grappling. This is why I say ecological dynamics has actually enhanced my definition of what creativity is. Because now people are like, okay, I want to know what the most efficient way to perform X technique. Well, ecological dynamics will help you with that. Like if you just simply want to complete a task and you're happy with that, eco can help you with that. But if you want to complete a task that is most meaningful for you, then that's your own journey. And that's something that you would have to employ something like autopoiesis, right? And that's something I'm still learning more about.
Sure. Yeah, with ecological, so ecological psychology and ecological dynamics as domains are not interchangeable, in my opinion.
Of course, yeah.
So ecological psychology is one of the major part of the synthesis of ecological dynamics. You also have dynamical systems theory, Carl Newell's theory of constraints, which is very much he's a dynamical systems theory thinker. You have more work that's been done by I think Kelso is one of the researchers. You have work on affordances that's post-Gibsonian that has extended that concept, because Gibson, while revolutionary, was not he didn't have it all figured out. And really importantly is you have Bernstein. Right. And so when you talk about enactivism, this is sometimes called generative psychology. So Bernstein is like one of the, I don't know if it's Bernstein or Bernstein. I
know who you're talking about.
Yes. He's the Russian Soviet researcher.
Yeah.
Sometimes credited with being one of the first people to think in terms of generative psychology. You are not simply acted upon, but an actor into your environment. And so with this is what's really important to me with the ecological psychology versus the whole of ecological dynamics, is that your influence on the environment is at least 1/3 of the equation, depending on the sort of activity you're engaged in. And so you have the model of constraints that system behavior emerges as the confluence of interacting constraints, task environment, and organism. It's easy to believe when we talk in terms of embeddedness that the agent then somehow dissolves into the environment task system. But in fact, the agent is 1/3 of the system. And it is not simply in jiu-jitsu, people that have nothing to do with ecological psychology or any of the ecological dynamics, all they talk about reaction. It's starting to rub me the wrong way, because it's really not about being a reactor in every instance. You are certainly adjusting to your perceptual input, but you are just as much an actor. Every move that you make, even those reactions and adjustments, inject information to the system, which then the system organizes itself around. And so there's so much going on organizing the system, sometimes in very rapid fire interaction. But that doesn't mean that you're your agency is thereby removed. And you had some great examples. I think one instance where it is very clear that you as a person, as a human being, how important your own agency is during reflection. Now, I think that some ecological psychologists would say that when you reflect on things that you're not actively participating in, right? Remembering,
exactly. That's what they
analyzing, yes, you are you're creating an experience, but that experience is internal, and your analysis of it is not, the information from that experience is not so dictated by the experience as it would be if you were actually in the match. You have much more, based on all your internal constraints, your knowledge base, your experience, how inclined you are towards an analytical understanding and analysis and stuff. That is influenced by all this stuff, but it's very dominantly just you, whatever you are. whatever composes you.
This is where like it gets a little bit fuzzy, right? Like if you ask like ecological psychologists or ecological dynamics people, like, well, where's the meaning in what we're doing? And I think Jay Gibson said, well, the perception itself is meaningful. What are you talking about? Right.
Yeah.
But like you said, like we are reflective beings. Like we do need to reflect on what we're doing. There's another school of thought within the embodied cognition umbrella, which is the free energy principle. Is more of a recent development by Carl Friston.
Yeah.
Again, like the organism is coupled with the environment. All the information is in the environment, but the agent cannot process all the information. It needs to create constraints in order to control the flow of information and energy to the agent so it can start to, perceive the environment. But the caveat is that it starts creating self-narratives, whether they're true or not, in order for it to understand its world. So in another way to put it is that the agent is creating environments and uses systems to understand it. It doesn't necessarily know the whole world, but it needs to do this in order to like recognize like what's going on, right? So this is another field of research. This suggests that the agent does have some type of autonomy. It has some type of agency in light of all the information that's going on between the agent and the the agent and the environment, right? So this is like, for me, this is actually very fascinating stuff. It's kind of challenging some of the ideas in ecopsych, but not in a very like antagonistic way. It's just sort of informing of some of the experiences that I'm going through right now. And it's very fascinating work. Like I said, I'm still learning more about it. I mean, like it, even though I've been doing this for 10 months, I just had a few breakthroughs in the last 3 weeks. And it's just like, I mean, the more you do it, the better you get. I mean, I got 4 classes to organize using ecological dynamics. I got gi, I got no gi, I got a judo class and a wrestling class that I have to like come up with constraint games, come up what's the intention, attention, all that stuff. So I'm really much immersed in this. I have a lot of practice, which is a good thing, but it can be pretty overwhelming. And the athletes' responses, I have a hard time answering their questions because I sympathize. I sympathize, like, people want to have answers. Like, I was a beginner one time. I want to know what's going on. And the thing that I hated was when coaches say, oh, just keep work on it, you'll be fine. But now I'm finding myself being in that position of telling people, like, figure it out. That's not satisfactory to me. So I had to find a way to give them an insight without just like telling them to just keep showing up and just keep doing what you're doing. I have to give them a little bit more without explicitly telling them what I feel is the best thing, right? And this is a challenge with this approach of, if you're going to adopt ecological dynamics, like everybody who's done it will tell you that it is a lot of work. Like it is
right.
a ton of work.
Yes.
Like it's so easy to just show somebody a technique and just say, yeah, go with it. If it doesn't work, I'll give you another technique. It's like giving them a pill, right? It doesn't work like that here. There's a lot of like, it's fascinating, but also the journey is actually very interesting.
It certainly is. It's you have to do the reading. Maybe one day you can just apprentice yourself to another coach and learn through questioning and osmosis. But whether you like it or not, you have to do the reading, because I can give you a template of games, and certainly it is inspired by the ecological framework for how to design the constraints-led approach to how to design practice. But in giving you a template, you are just doing Josh's template. You're not doing ecological dynamics, because if you're doing ecological dynamics, everything you do is being filtered through that set of principles, how you understand them. And there's going to be uniqueness there. And it's more than just, we play games to address these problems, right? Games are just one instantiation of ecological dynamics. If you're doing ecological dynamics to learn floor gymnastics or a performance art where you perform solo on the stage, you don't play games in the way that you play games in jiu-jitsu, which is a sort of a dyadic combat situation.
Right.
And you don't play games when you play soccer the same way that you do with jiu-jitsu, because soccer involves more players and a different environment to manage. So it is different. I can give you the games, but in giving you the games, I have not thereby given you the ecological approach to training. I've given you one.
You're a striker, right? You do Taekwondo, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Have you done other forms of striking?
I've done kickboxing. I've done boxing. I've done karate. I've done a little bit of Muay Thai.
Right. So I've done striking before, and back when I was doing striking, a lot of people they'll go to the heavy bag or they'll go to the pad work, and they'll work combinations, right? So they'll do combination one, even have a numbering system, 1 jab, 2 cross, 3 hook, right? And it'll call out the numbers, right? And then when it's time to spar, they'll try to do those combinations within a dynamic situation in sparring. And then I found that, it's easy to counter them. I literally know what you're going to do. Just right off the jab, I know you're going to start throwing that cross, right? And then you can, it's, so there, this type of model that people do, like, they don't understand why they're hitting the pads. They don't understand why they're hitting the bags, even though it may be beneficial in other ways. There has to be this sense of variability, right? You must add variability. And I'm sure yourself, you probably do a lot of like striking, which involves variability. And I'm just curious to ask, like how are you like applying this to striking?
Yeah, striking's hard. So I'm not actively coaching striking right now.
Oh, okay.
And it's been a while since I've been able. What I practice most dominantly right now is jiu-jitsu. But in terms of, I work with other coaches, and one of them is a really close friend of mine. And with combinations are 100% based on affordances that you perceive and create. They are not based on a sequence of punches, no matter how natural and cool and fluid they feel when you practice them. Combinations are emergent. And so there's a certain degree to which you can sort of bait and help create actions. But you can't force an opponent to behave exactly the same way whenever you want them to. And thus, you cannot just throw a series of combinations. This is a problem in everything. It's a problem in karate. I saw kids doing that when I used to teach a little karate program, like I taught with a charity karate program. There's a few times when everyone got their sparring gear on and went out to spar, and they had no concept of range. They're way out of range, and they would throw a rote sequence of a combination that didn't make any sense to anything that exists in the world, and then they would wonder why they couldn't land or they couldn't score. And it's because the way of training ruined their ability to do that. Yeah. They needed more time sparring and not time doing combinations and hitting.
But see, this is what I'm seeing in jiu-jitsu right now. Like, I'll go spar with people in jiu-jitsu, and they're looking at the sequence that Gordon Ryan's doing on his DVD. And I watched the same DVD. I know what you're doing, and I know the next move you're going to do. Mm-hmm. Right? They're basically throwing combinations at me, right? And I'm just kind of seeing through it, and I'm just like, okay, well, I know what the next play is going to be. So when I started doing ecodynamics, me as not just as a coach, but as an athlete, I'm embracing the non-linearity of the whole process. Like, and that's throwing people off, right? Like, it's, how should I say this? Like, most people, when they watch a DVD, like particularly like the Danaher system, they'll get mount position. They're going to separate the elbows away from the body, and then try to bring it above the elbow above the shoulders, and then you're going to do the chest wrap. I know that sequence. Like, I know that's what's going to happen. I'm stopping it dead on its tracks, right? But when I'm doing the eco approach, since there's no such thing as a side control, it's just pinning the shoulders and putting your back to the floor. I'm moving around. I'm isolating several limbs, maybe sometimes at the same time. It's really throwing people off. They don't know, like it's not computing in their head, right?
Yeah.
And just embracing that whole, like, not looking at the human body as a machine, but looking at the human body as a living system, right? That's a very different way of approaching grappling, right? Mm-hmm. So this is what ecological dynamics is trying to get at, is that we are not machines, right? Mechanics do have a part to play within invariance, but it is not the only thing that work here. Like, we have to embrace the idea that we are constantly moving, and we're constantly resisting, and we're always at play here, and we have to be okay with that. I mean, when I teach judo, I don't teach any throws. I don't teach people how to break fall. I get completely new people coming in, and usually in the judo community, first things first, you got to learn how to fall, and then the second thing you need to learn is a basic throw. But none of that translates into the actual randori or the actual free practice that we do. What I'm doing in class is that we start with the grip fighting first. We got to learn how to grip somebody. That's the very first thing. It's very rare that, at least where I'm at, it's very rare for a judo club to focus on grip fighting. You tend to somehow grip somebody in a particular way, and then you start repping out uchikomis or, static dead drilling of one throw, right? What I'm doing is you're getting used to variability. The whole goal right now, usually when I get somebody who's new, is you either get double inside position, grab the collars, or try to get your two hands on your opponent and make sure they have less on you. So that involves some type of grip breaking. If you can get two hands on your opponent or two grips on your opponent and have less on you, you're dictating the match. If you cannot break their grips, just get double inside position, and then you are dictating the match. And what people are finding is that by default, when they're actually succeeding in their tasks, they're creating off-balancing actions just from the grip, attaining the grip on its own. And then some type of kazushi is happening, and they're experiencing this context here. And it's very fascinating how they're self-organizing in ways that they're not even aware of. And they're accidentally pulling off throws by accident.
Yeah, I have an interesting interjection there, and I think that the way jiu-jitsu is normally taught is that kazushi is an event rather than an embedded part of how you interact with a partner. And so what the way you've designed the learning environment and the way you've calibrated the attention of your learners is that, in fact, they must engage in these off-balancing acts to even consider themselves to be in a place of advantage. Whereas for me, when I first started, it's like, okay, you only do the scissor sweep when you've met these conditions, the person's posture is too upright, etc. And so I've learned 3 or 4 sweeps. Maybe I'll notice a cue, quote unquote, for a sweep. I almost always miss it, and there's no consideration put into how to create the conditions, how to keep a person consistently off balance. There's an interesting. I hate chess analogies, but there's an interesting chess analogy here with the play style of Bobby Fischer. And one of the reasons why he was a fiend when it came to chess theory, but one of the reasons he was able to constantly just throw elite players off, like players that were more experienced than him, constantly throw them off, is because his strategy, a lot of people, they have more of a nuanced strategy. They set traps, things like that. Fischer constantly created pressure. He created problems and pressure at all times. And eventually this cognitively wore down his opponents in their minds. And your focus starts to atrophy. You start to make mistakes. So when you're always raising that level of concentration higher and higher and higher and higher, now you're going to start making mistakes, right? You create the problems. The more problems you create, the harder they are to navigate. And jiu-jitsu, I'm not going to say it's exactly the same, but in the abstract, it is almost the same, because the more problems you create for somebody to navigate, the more they're reactive rather than active, the more that they are acting based on your generative action. You can dictate the match, and you can begin to create errors. This is what Marcelo Garcia's game is about. And he's explicitly taught this before. And you can see it by watching his game. This is an instance where he has actually correctly identified what's led to his success. And he tries to teach it to his credit. He says, create perturbations, right? And he teaches it from an attacking standpoint, like passing the guard and things like that. But he also teaches it from a standpoint of guard play too. Create problems, off balance. Every time you have to make somebody move in a way they didn't anticipate and they have to adjust, that's a second that they have to recalibrate their attention oftentimes.
Since I've been looking into differential training, we'll go into that in a minute here, but like,
sure,
I'm not looking for solutions anymore. I'm trying to create perturbations. I'm looking for noise. I'm trying to create noise for the other person to get messed up on, right? So I can see the signal in the noise. They don't know where that signal is, right? So coming back to the grip fighting game that I was playing, get double inside position, or you can get more grips on your opponent than they have on you. Now, what I add to Tori, the performer, is this is what I call hip or leg expressions, or manifolds of your legs and hips. You can place your hips anywhere you want. You can place your legs wherever you want, so long that when you feel that kazushi or that off-balancing action within the game of getting your inside position. So when you start enacting in that, you start going for inside position, breaking grips, they're off balance. You decide, depending on your distance or the context, what you're going to do. You can put your hips in somewhere, or you can put your legs in anywhere you like. And what happens is that people are accidentally throwing each other without even knowing any tech. It's like magic, and they don't know. Like this is going back to the first example I was telling you about. They don't know what they're doing. they want to replicate what they just did because it was such a cool throw. They did it, but now they have to recognize that it only existed in that moment, right? It only existed in which that environment afforded them to enact on, right? And this is where I'm getting the idea that this changes my idea of what creativity in grappling is now, right? It's sort of like jazz. It's sort of like abstract expressionism, right? We're not trying to recreate. We're not trying to encapsulate anything. And this is another reason why I feel that I cannot do any more instructional videos. Like it's just simply, I can't do it, right? Knowing what I know now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Creativity is really when the subject finds a little bit of a different or unique way to solve a problem. Everyone else solves the problem too, but they solve it in a little bit of a different way. And at least that's part of the equation of creativity.
And I mentioned differential training. So I don't know if it certainly applies to this example, to that game, that judo game we're playing. But okay, so now I'm the one that's grip fighting into position. Now I'm having the expressions of my legs and hips. Now the other person can do the same. Now they can start doing their own expressions of the hips and legs. And now we have a small-sided game where we're actually doing randori within the constraints of, the grip fighting. You must have 2 grips on your opponent. They have less on you. And people may see the signal. Maybe they may not see signal within that noise, but it just becomes a very fascinating game at that point. And then when you get them to do live training, okay, all the constraints are out. Go ahead, play by judo rules. The transfer of skills is very near. It's amazing,
right?
And a lot of these insights that I've been getting from coaching has really sold me on ecological dynamics. Like I'm seeing the results of it, and even other coaches at my judo club are seeing. They don't necessarily understand what I'm doing, but they just see it. They see the superficiality of it. They see okay, what Sonny is doing is that he's taking games like live resistance games, even though they don't understand ecological dynamics, they're borrowing the games, which is good. Like if people want to get into it, get your toes wet. Yeah. Okay. Be inspired by the games. Right. But it's not about the games though. Right.
Right.
I want to talk about attractors too, because Rob Gray and Greg talk about attractors in the sense that I wouldn't say negative, but it doesn't apply to attractors is something where you fall back on when things don't go your way, and then you just go to what you feel is comfortable. So, for example, if you take a BJJ guy and you put him in a judo match, right? The BJJ guy is going to have that bent over posture. They might even start like pulling guard. Of course, that is not judo, but that's the attractor, that he can't help it. That's what he's used to, right? So usually what Rob and Gray would do, they would create a game in order to, remedy those attractors and help him self-organize into ways in which he can be attuned to that environment. But I look at attractors in a sense that's very positive, right? So when I'm designing a game, I take into account attractors as well. Not in the negative sense, but in the positive sense. So if I'm half guard passing somebody and, your goal is to get chest to chest or chest to back connection, I will maybe find a way to get them to get into a Kimura trap. Okay. Now, attractors in dynamical systems theory is that it's a point in a system that pulls you into another system. And now you have a new set of tasks and goals once you're in that new system, right? So a Kimura trap can allow you to pass the half guard, but you're now all of a sudden basically teleported to the back. And now you have a new set of goals and tasks to find solutions to. You can even go for like, say, if the affordance was there for a guillotine. A guillotine can be pull you into another system, into like the front headlock system. So attractors for me can like understanding it from Rob Gray. Yeah. Okay. I can see that, we need to remedy some attractors, but they can also be used creatively when you are perceiving affordances. There could be enough affordance to go into what you're naturally inclined to do. And I always encourage athletes to do what they are naturally inclined to do, because it doesn't involve information processing. It basically teleports you to where you want to be. And I use that word like, very playfully. So
yeah, they don't have to remember a discrete sequence of sequence of discrete steps.
Yeah. So I always encourage people to know what your attractors are and use them creatively. And if the affordance is there for it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just a note for listeners who are new. When somebody says system with regard to like headlock, Kumar trap, that's probably, you're familiar. That's a jiu-jitsu system. That is a strategy, or in some cases, a sequence. When we talk about like the athlete environment system, that is a different kind of system. We mean something different by that. We're talking about a relationship and a sort of mutuality. So we're using system in a couple of different ways here. But that is an interesting thing that occurred to me, because when you said that, because you'd been using system in the other way before, because you're having deep conversation about ecology and stuff. I was confused. Yeah. I was confused for a second. I was like, wait, what?
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, because I mean, there's like I said, I'm still learning more about this, and then I'm using some of the old nomenclature. It's going to creep in. So. It's very normal. And what I like about the movement community and the ecological dynamics community is that we all admit that we're all new to this, right? And we're all still learning. Even Greg Souders says that he's a purple belt at this, like he's, it's like the guy, the guy's been doing it longer than any of us. Like, I mean, he admits that he still has a long way to go. Right.
Sure.
So, I mean, it's nice to hear that.
Yeah. I just wanted to clear that up. It was interesting because when you said it, the attractor pulls you into another system. I was like, that's not dynamical systems theory. We're not, we don't get out of we're embedded there. It doesn't,
yes, we're embedded. Right. It pulls, maybe I should say they pulled you into another phase space. Maybe that's better.
A strategy. I think a strategy is a good word for that, and everyone kind of understands that the Kimura trap system is not actually a system.
It's not a system per se. Yeah,
it's not a system per se, or at least not in the sense we mean when we discuss system. It's actually a strategy. It's a couple of principles, physical principles of places you could go once acquiring that configuration. We still believe in ecological dynamicists, still believe in strategy.
Yeah.
However, strategy is not a model which dictates your behavior necessarily, because anything could ruin your strategy, because it's really about your attention. And if something gets you so fixated, your body's not going to be calibrated by a strategic intention necessarily. But yeah, that was sorry. I didn't mean to derail you there. I just wanted to.
Oh no.
To clarify.
Please do. Like, I mean, I'm sometimes I have to be mindful of what I say, and it's nice that you pointed that out.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're using terms that are actually probably more familiar to my audience in terms of like what a system is, in terms of a sequence or a set of options. But I was I was actually confused for a second, and then I realized, oh yeah, he's using the jiu-jitsu terms for these different strategies. Yeah.
Cool. One of the things I found in ecological dynamics is, like, I know we talked about agency and autonomy and how it's a difficult thing to handle within this approach, but it does give you a lot of agency and autonomy as an athlete. Like, as an athlete, I'm not restricted by the authority of the coach or the instructor. I'm encouraged to problem solve on my own. I'm encouraged to do the things that I going to fall back on, my attractors that can be used in a creative way. I mean, you know what it's like, Josh, the standard structure of like okay, warm-ups, technique, and then sparring, that 3-act structure. But people are just going to end up doing what they want to do anyway, right? So why not just like encourage that? And that's what eco-dynamics for me not only helps the athletes, but it's very much encouraged, and there's
Absolutely.
autonomy and agency in that, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
want to get to a point where my room is so good where my athletes will create their own constraint games, and
Mhm.
they can like try it out on their training partner, right? And then what is the need for me? Like, I don't need to be, I don't need to be
Mhm.
there like telling people what to do. Like at this phase, yeah, I'm gonna have to be designing games, but if people were really interested and they really want to get into it, man, it'd be such a thrill that people will just come into class and they want to try their own thing. And
Right.
and it'll be very much an autonomous and self-organizing room using ecological dynamics. But I'm not there yet. I would like to see how that works out. It's very, I don't know, it's very theoretical, but it'd be very
Yeah.
interesting to see where this goes in the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. In the constraints-led approach, the coach is positioned as in some ways as a co-learner, but you're also you're a guide in the earlier stages.
In the early
And
stage, yeah, you're a
yeah,
guide,
and so
but so there is a reciprocal
yeah.
relationship between the
Mhm.
athlete and the coach, right? So if like this is something that I have to be aware of, is not to interject in someone's learning, because then I just decouple them from the environment, the experience a state of deseverance, they're alienated from what they're doing. I don't want that, right? Even if someone where I perceive is doing quote unquote mistakes, I have to allow them to go through that. And if I can find, if I can tailor some type of or design a game in which it allows them to behave in a way to get away from those quote unquote um, mistakes, um, perhaps the athlete can self-organize in ways that I can't even conceive. So um, it is a learning experience, man. Like it is tough. It's tough, but it's because but I think people who are coming into coaching or even as athletes, if the earlier the better. The more exposure you have with it without any other preconceived notions, I think you're going to enjoy this approach.
Mhm. Absolutely. I wanna circle back to attractors real quick. You
Sure.
mentioned that, Rob Gray tends to talk about it in a negative light, which is true, but attractors aren't necessarily negative. The issue is you don't want attractor, wells. Now I have to explain the attractor analogy. So if you think of, an attractor states as a plane with little, divots in it, right? The deeper the divot, the more likely dust and rainwater and all that stuff is going to fall into that divot, which becomes like a
Hmm.
hole, really, or a basin. Um, and when you practice, your body has a natural way it wants to tend. Um, y- as you go through that sort of, if you repeat those tendencies, by the way, are never exactly the same. But there's a broad tendency to your organization system towards sorts of tactics and strategies. If you don't practice with enough variability, and you don't try enough different kinds of tactics, you're gonna have a very deep and narrow attractor state. So if somebody puts you into a problem that's novel that you've never experienced before, and this previous attractor state that you tend towards in order to solve that problem, it's not even close to addressing it. It's just going to break, and you're not going to have much there for navigating that problem. If you're always practicing in a very variable environment, and there's all kinds of different problems to solve that need to be solved in different ways, your attractor states are going to be wider in not quite as deep, so that in fact, this is a good thing because you're actually more adaptable. You have more solutions that can work across different problems. And so you're not stuck into a small set of or ways of moving. I don't know if that's a really great way to
Well, I'll use myself as an
explain it.
example. Like
Yeah, sure.
I'm a leg lock guy. Everything I do is leg locks.
Yep.
No, even when I'm passing the guard, I'll drop into a 411 or a saddle position and I'll pass from there. Yeah, okay, I'm passing, it works, but I'm developed a well there, right? And my fallback plan is always go for the legs. Now, when I started doing eco dynamics, I was forced to play the back position. I'm not very good at finishing rear naked strangles or even attacking from the back. But over the months, now all I go for is for the back now. I never used to be like that. And my attractor to going towards the legs is a lot less right now. So the variability of passing the guard and seeing back exposure and all these things, like all these affordances start presenting themselves now. And I don't think I've dropped to the legs as much as I used to, although I still could. I mean, I still do it every once in a while and I do it quite well, but I'm the variability allows me to perceive a lot more affordances now since we've been playing these small-sided games. And now I love taking the back now. I mean, it's it's one of those positions in jiu-jitsu is it's that you really want, but it's very hard to finish, right? But now it's like it's amazing. I love taking the back now. It's like one of my main go-tos now. Even though it's not something that I'm attracted to, I can play it now.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. An interesting thing about trying to fix an attractor state that is way, 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 way too deep, right? So much so that you're unable to deal with different problems, and so it's actually impeding your overall performance. This happens all the time, even with professional athletes. From an ecological dynamics approach, the strategy is actually to destabilize that attractor, which will result in a temporary decrement in performance. And if you're coming from an information processing perspective, you're going to lose your mind.
Yeah.
Because the linear approach to training is this idea that you'll find new floors of performance that you won't fall under, but you'll never fall under that floor of performance. And so performance should always be going up and up and up and up and up, even if you hit plateaus. Whereas in the nonlinear view of learning, yeah, there are performance floors, but if you're trying to fix something, dude, you might go back to a blue belt level of performance in passing if we take away your brick game because we want you to start passing with more tools.
Right.
And that's going to if you're approaching learning from an IP perspective, you're going to be exasperated with yourself, you're going to be exasperated with your athlete, and you're just going to put a lot of negative energy into that system, and it's not going to be good. So there are so many things that you have to let go of when you become an ecological dynamics coach. And you have to have a totally different mindset about how you approach training. And you have to totally recalibrate your expectations. In fact, it's often a good thing if there's a decrement in performance, because if there's real learning there, like a person was performing at a high level due to genuine learning, and then all of a sudden they're having troubles they weren't having before, it's probably because they're about to make a leap in performance. Their system is figuring something out. There's some novelty there that it's trying to navigate, and it's trying to attune to the right information.
I have a question for you, Josh.
Sure.
Where do you see ecological dynamics, this approach in sport going in 5 years or even 10 years? Do you think it will catch on? Because we've already discussed that there's a lot of challenges involved in order to plan classes and even like change your perspective on what you thought Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I think that the constraints-led approach, which is, it's part of the ecological approach, I think that is going to become much more popular, especially as it becomes more explicitly visible in pro sport contexts. Rob Gray consults for the Red Sox. There's a bunch of UK sports circuits that have these sort of thinkers. There's people emerging in the MMA space. Jiu-jitsu obviously is taking off. For ecological dynamics specifically, different from the constraints-led approach being only a model of motor learning, right? In a way of coaching that is underpinned by ecological dynamics.
Right.
Ecological dynamics as a theory, which is understood on the level that we have discussed it in this podcast, I don't see it growing much. I'm a little bit cynical on it because it requires such concerted effort. And I don't want to say that coaches are dumb. They're not dumb. Coaches are rightly focused on their athletes, and they are focused on their athletes. They mess around in different methods and methodologies only insofar as they're trying to get results. And so some of the philosophical and scientific legwork that they need to undertake in order to understand this theory and then to apply it in a very authentic and robust way, I don't think they're going to do it, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
However, I see people who maybe are a little bit higher up on the chain in pipelines, like the sport development pipelines. I can see those sorts of people leading the way, which is what they ought to do. I can see them using ecological dynamics to help shape the way they do talent identification, the way they do development camps, the way that they structure tournaments and things like that. I can certainly see that growing a lot in the coming years, but I don't see coaches getting far beyond the basic principles of the constraints-led approach.
I agree with you with the constraint-led approach, but what about differential learning? That's something new to me. I'm still doing more research on it. I understand some of the basic principles of it. Some of it looks a little bit wacky, to be honest, from the outside. But I mean, the research involved and reading papers by Wolfgang Schulhorn, very fascinating stuff. Interesting. I mean, I might use elements of differential learning at this phase of my development, but I haven't gotten full in on it. It just looks hilarious to me, but I'm not doubting the effectiveness of it. What's your experience with differential learning?
So for me, it's interesting. I like what the research is showing about it. In terms of something like combat sports, differential learning is really well suited to a more discrete task like pitching, batting, free throws. When you're in a constant interaction, like a combat sport, or other aspects of sports like soccer, a correct application is harder to lock onto, which is why I like the constraints-led approach. So Rob Gray has his way of contextualizing differential learning within the constraints-led approach, because it is possible, and I have seen this before. There's a jiu-jitsu school that does primarily differential stuff, and it for me, it breaks the aliveness. It breaks the representativeness. And so if I am a proponent of doing differential things, but what that means is actually injecting randomness into the interaction. That's the live interaction. And so different starting places, maybe the rules of the game change midway. There's any different, rapid rounds with different people. There's any number of different ways to create noise, random noise in the game or into the system, where you don't break the aliveness. Because right now what I see is, with people applying differential learning, some of them are breaking the aliveness to ramp up the random elements. The stuff, a lot of it looks bizarre. And Wolfgang Schulhorn is, I've seen him on LinkedIn and YouTube. he approves of it. So for that clashes with my constraints-led pedigree, if I can call it that. I'm first and foremost an ecological dynamics constraints-led guy, and so I'm interested in differential learning. But I'm only interested in differential learning insofar as it accentuates what I do with constraints-led approach, not in being some sort of co-equal part of it or as an alternative to it at all. It's easy to get rid of what's good about alternative training methods in order to do something that's actually more like traditional training, but just funky.
Yeah, I agree with you with that. Like differential learning, it seems very fascinating to me, but I mean, I will only use elements of it within the constraint-led approach, at least in my
Right.
practices. So,
Right.
and that makes the most sense to me. Again, keeping with the primary concerns of what my class is all about. You know, the athlete, the task, and the environment. There has to be a mutual relationship between all of them, and self-organization or autopoiesis. All these things are first and foremost for me. I don't need anything to break that mutuality, right? So the challenge is, and even like with coaches who are trying to take up the ecological dynamics framework, or even like constraint-led approach or differential learning, there is no like standard, like there is no step-by-step process. Again, like just as the athletes are engaging in this in a non-linear and spontaneous way, coaches are actually taking up this approach also in a non-linear and spontaneous way. Like there is no instruction manual to tell you how to do this. Even Rob Gray has expressed that this is more of an art. Like you have to like engage with it on a consistent basis in order to get kind of a knack for it. Right.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, and you do. And I think this is something that like a lot of coaches are very dismissive about this approach. Is go, well, you guys don't like how do you start this? You guys are talking nonsense. Like it's from an IP perspective, like you mentioned, it is like it's gonna drive you insane. I completely understand. Like I totally understand. And I say some pretty weird stuff in class. Like I say like, oh yeah, that technique doesn't exist, or that position doesn't exist. And they think I'm joking, and I am kind of joking, but I'm also kind of serious too, right? Like I don't look at jujitsu, I don't look at grappling the same anymore. I don't look at grappling in terms of positions. I don't look at it in terms of techniques anymore. I just look at affordances. I look at I find invariance properties. That's all I'm saying. And I don't care how that invariant looks like. I'll take what I can utilize, and whatever happens. I don't even know. I have no plan on what I'm doing. Maybe I do have a plan, but it's not representational. It's not coming from an informational processing center. It's coming. I would like to think it's coming from in an embodied way, and this is like I mean it's I used to think like grappling was fun. It's even more fun now. Like it's just
for sure.
it's just like way more fun now. But I have to recognize that people are at different levels and they're still learning and such. But like sometimes I just like to just throw myself into the environment and just self-organize my way into it or out of it, and you get some interesting results.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot. I'm more engaged with what my opponent is doing and not trying to recall the techniques or something. And I'm not frustrated with myself because I can't quote unquote remember techniques. And I'm having a blast just exploring.
Yeah.
It's fun just to explore.
Even if you're like getting smashed, like I'm not even like panicking. Like I'm okay. Yeah. All right. He's up on the scorecards, whatever, like I'm getting out, this is fine. And, you find a reversal, and then you just continue your game. And, I think that's because of the variability aspect of what we're doing. Like if someone scores on me in a guard pass, like I'm not going to be like mentally like, oh my God, I'm behind, like it's just, another day at the office. Oh, okay. All right. Let's see what we can do from here. It's really changed like how I think about it. And I don't know. I don't even have I don't even have the language to describe what's going on. Like, at least not yet. So
Yeah. Other than saying it's embodied.
yeah, it's embodied, whatever that means.
We all just have to feel it so we can understand what the word means.
Yeah. Yeah.
From our perspective.
Yeah. No, it's like even a lot of high level coaches, like they're not very good at explaining of what they're doing, but they literally have to take you aside and physically do it on you. And I mean,
Right.
that's embodied cognition right there.
Absolutely.
You know, they literally have to feel it in a kinesthetic way, right?
Doing and remembering are one and the same.
Yeah, exactly. That's one and the same. So, even myself, like someone's trying to explain something to me and I'm like, can you show me what you're doing? You know, like, I mean, I need to feel it. Right. So, yeah, it's just, we shouldn't discourage anybody. Like, not everything can be explained in language, you know, action is just as much as knowing as explaining it, through language. Right. So.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost 2 hours on now, so I'm going to let you get back to your day. But where can people find you if they want to reach out and pick your brains?
You can find me on Instagram, Praxis Gym. That's me. Or you can go to praxisgym.com. Based in Vancouver, Canada. If you ever want to do some judo or jiu-jitsu or wrestling, just give me a shout. Be happy to have you.
Absolutely, man. Thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks so much for listening to the Combat Learning Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, remember to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice. It really helps us out. Finally, this episode, including the intro music, is produced by Micah Peacock. Thanks in advance, and I'll see you on the next episode.